All right, well, let's get started. I will be simultaneously talking and admitting people, and hopefully I do a good job of both at the same time. Um, my name is Blythe Lord. I am the founder and executive director of Courageous Parents Network. I want to welcome you here to our session, The Empowered Parent, Considering Tracheostomy with or Without Mechanical Ventilation. We are very lucky today to have with us Doctors Renee Boss, Carrie Henderson, and Ben Wilfond, who will be sharing with you their work, which is important, impressive, fascinating, of interest to anyone who is either considering this decision or working with families who are considering this decision. And then there will be questions, a period for question and answers after. A few technical bits. If you could please mute your audio until we open it up for questions and answers. But you can add comments via chat through the chat feature. You can also raise your hand to ask a question if you need to ask a question before we get to the Q&A session. We welcome that. With joining me from Courageous Parents Network are Jennifer Seidman and Janet Duncan, and they will be taking care of the chat feature so that I don't have to, and so that they can be responsive to you. And also Renee and Ben and Carrie, if you see things in the chat when you're not talking that you want to address while somebody else is talking, please do. The chat feature is saved as a transcript and often has a lot of really valuable stuff in that after. We will be sending a follow-up email to all attendees with a link to this recording and anything that we think is valuable in the chat transcript, as well as links to what you're going to hear about from Renee and Ben and Carrie, and to Courageous Parents Network's resources on tracheostomy. So all of that will come to you in a follow-up email. So don't feel like you have to take notes unless that is your preference. All right, so why this topic? One could really, all things with regard to Courageous Parents Network could be preceded by the empowered parent, because that is at our core what we are about, empowering parents as advocates and decision makers for their children. And of course, what we know from experience and from what we've heard from other parents and pediatric providers is that there are few decisions as challenging for parents as the decision of whether their child should receive a tracheostomy, which may or may not also involve mechanical ventilation. We at CPN believe that it is vitally important that parents feel informed and supported and empowered as advocates and decision makers to advance their child's well-being, both medical and otherwise. And empowerment comes from process and choice. And what you're going to hear about today is how these three doctors have developed a tool and are interested in the process and the decision making to empower parents. And this is, of course, also how we frame things in our materials on CPN about tracheostomy and other decision making. Before we get to Renee and Ben and Carrie, we are going to share a video on CPN, which features two parents who made two different choices for their child. I'm going to flip over to the live site, so bear with me. Hopefully this goes smoothly. I'm going to minimize this and go over to the live site. How do I get there? Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Where are we? Where's the site? All right, I'm going to here. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. I'm going to go, there it is. Now we will get there. Here it is, and now I'll share again. Share my screen. Share. And here we go. Can you all see this? Thumbs up that you can see this? Excellent. All right.
Initially, when I thought of a trach, when they talked to me about the trach, they said, in the future, you would have to, decide whether or not to trach your child. And I'm thinking, no, after seeing that little girl and the way I thought of it at that point was cutting a hole in my son's throat. No, there's no way. And when he was 11 months old, he kept getting sick. He was on the BiPAP, and we kept ending up back in the hospital. And in February, which wasn't that long later, they said they tried to extubate him, take him off the vent, and they were unsuccessful. And they said, you have to make a decision. Are we going to let him go and do comfort care? Or do you want to trach him and put him on a vent? So I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to answer that question because my no from before was no longer on the table, because losing my son, letting him go, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to do that. So they were both bad choices. So I thank God I had my faith, because I prayed every night for 5 days. I said, God, you have to make this decision. I cannot make this decision. I went back and I told the nurses, I'm ready for the PAC team, sat down with them, and I said, we're going to get the trach. So we did. And afterwards, I was so grateful that we had gotten the trach, because Alex had been so weak and he was always struggling, and, the breathing was just hard. And after he was put on the vent, he was so much stronger in so many other ways, because he didn't have to struggle to breathe so much. And I remember a few years ago, because we were living in this house, so Zoe had already been born. So it may have been 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I was walking through Alex's room, and he'd been sick for a while. And I remember thinking to myself, I didn't say anything. He didn't have a nurse that day. I was his nurse. And I was walking through his room thinking, did I really do what was best for him? And I immediately heard the voice say, you didn't make that decision. And so I immediately looked up and said, that's right, I didn't. So I didn't have that guilt that, did I do what? It's so hard to make life and death decisions for your child.
It seems very weird for somebody, but he's got this cute face. And not that it's just about looks, but it's not going to extend his quality of life. It's just going to add more to our plate. I have, Isaiah, who would be ripping out a trach. I have a dog with, that's around him with and they're close. When you see them downstairs, they're all together, Avery, Isaiah, and the dog. It would have added more madness to our life. And so not only the look, but Isaiah, he pulls his central line on a regular basis. It just wasn't fitting with our family system. And I had to really decide that what was he going to gain out of it? And any decision that I make for Avery and Isaiah is what is going to be the gain for it? And while, him not having a trach, yes, we have to do deep nasal suctioning and all that stuff, but we figure it out. I just feel like if it's not going to gain him enough, and it's not going to help his quality of life, then it's just not for us.
So that, I want to pause for a moment and just observe that we heard a lot going on in that. Ooh, did you disappear? Okay, here we go. There was a lot going on in that video. Two very different conditions, SMA. For the first mom, her son has SMA, and the second mom, has two children with advanced mitochondrial conditions. And I think we heard just the spectrum of ways that the decisions can get made, and the types of things that parents consider, and the inputs that they have when they are making that decision. The first mom, her faith in God played a really big role. We heard about that. The second, the logistics on the ground, including the existence of a dog, played a really big role in the decision that the mom made. All right, well, without further ado, I will hand this over to Renee and Carrie and Ben, and will you just please tell me when you want me to advance the screen?
Sure. So we can't see any of the slides now. So can you
Oh,
bring
you
us back to
can't?
the slides?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Why I'm share screen. How's that?
Mm-hmm.
There you go. Come on, go big. There we go.
Okay, great. So first we'd just like a chance to introduce ourselves, who we are, and how we came to be doing this work. And thank you so much to Blythe and Janet and others who have been talking with us about this work along the way and invited us to share today. I'm Renee Boss. I am a physician at Johns Hopkins. I work in neonatology and palliative care and bioethics. And for me, the work on this topic really started when I was a young neonatologist who was discharging her first patient home with a tracheostomy and a ventilator, and I'd taken care of that patient for what seemed like many months. Was a extremely premature baby, and felt like I had a decent understanding of who the family was, and had walked with them through parts of the journey. And yet when it came time to discharge the baby, I realized that turned out I didn't really know much of anything about their home life. And there were a number of, to me, unexpected problems that we ran into when we were getting ready to discharge the baby and the family, all things that I wished I'd known. I wished I'd known how far away they lived. I wished I'd known that they had trouble with transportation. I wished I'd known that home nursing might not be available in their area. And I hadn't known any of those things. So I really felt like I'd let down the family. And that was, for me, the beginning of an understanding that we needed more work and more guidance in this area for clinicians and families. So I'll pass it over now maybe to Carrie.
Thank you. I'm Carrie Henderson. I am a critical care physician in Mississippi. I did my training at bigger institutions, both at Vanderbilt and Cincinnati, before I came down here, which was a big step off as far as resources and what we have for families. And I kind of came at this topic in a similar way from Renee. So I was a baby attending, and on one hand, I was rounding on a patient who needed a trach and a vent, and her family was extremely resource strapped. I mean, very, very rural Mississippi family who, of no fault of their own, we just didn't have the capabilities to support them in the ways that they would need to do what they needed to do for their daughter. And at the same time, Ben had published a paper about considering tracheostomy and ventilation in, I think, in neurologically impaired children. And I read it, and then never got my answer to what do I do when they don't have the resources to take care of their child at home. And so I emailed him, and he called me like 5 minutes later. So it's always been such a funny story, because he was like, I have this other person in Baltimore. Let's have a conversation, the three of us. And that was in like 2014. So now 6 years later, here we are. So I've just continued to cultivate my interest in this topic for all the same reasons that Renee said, because on the same hand that she's, working in that area with neonatology, I have the same encounters in critical care as kids get older, who are born with chronic diseases that are over time debilitating. And so we see them in and out and are making these decisions probably even more longitudinally. So that's who I am. And I guess I'll pass it to Ben.
Great, thank you. So I'm Ben Wilfond. So I'm in Seattle. I'm at Seattle Children's Hospital. I'm the director of our Truman Cat Center for Pediatric Bioethics, and I'm also the the Division Chief for Bioethics and Palliative Care at Department of Pediatrics at University of Washington. And before being here, I've actually worked in a range of places around the country. I did my residency and fellowship in Wisconsin. I was on the faculty in Tucson, Arizona. Actually, for a while at Hopkins, when I worked at the NIH, I've been here for around 15 years. And since both Renee and Carrie began telling stories about what happened to them when they were early on in their professional careers, I'll share my story, one of my stories, which is actually in the article that Carrie mentioned, which was, as a pulmonologist, I was asked to do a consult in the NICU on a patient who was on a ventilator, and there was discussion about tracheostomy and home mechanical ventilation. But at this point, the clinical team was pretty certain this was the wrong decision, and they were very frustrated because the parents seemed to be asking for this. This is a family who only spoke Spanish, again, had limited resources. But the main reason the team didn't want it was because this was described as a lethal condition. And they said, well, this is just not appropriate to do. And as somebody who was new, I didn't really know, well, is this really a lethal condition, particular condition the person had? So I ended up calling a few people around the country, and of course learned that this was much more variable in terms of what can happen to families. And to make a long story short, this experience with this family, talking to the team, in this case, ultimately the family did decide to go ahead with the trach, although really left an impression on me about at least from my experience, sometimes the challenges families face receiving balanced information, because sometimes information they may get may be one-sided or another. And you'll see a big part of what we're trying to do here, very similar to what you saw from Blythe, was this notion that there's more than one perspective, there's more than one side to the story, and somehow being able to tell this balanced story can allow parents to make the decisions that are right for them. And I really want to acknowledge Blythe. I had not seen your video before, but I thought that was outstanding because it, in 3.5 minutes really captured this. And I think what you'll hear more from us is our effort to do a bit more elaborately what Blythe already showed you.
If you can just go back a second, Blythe, I'll just talk about, so what you see here is a picture of the website that the three of us have recently created. And I think you might have gotten a link to this beforehand, so you may have already seen it. But just to sort of put it in context, as Ben says, we as a team were very interested in creating something for families that would offer a range of perspectives. So would not just be talking to families who did ultimately choose to have a trach and vent, but we wanted to talk to equally honor the experiences of families who chose for their child not to have a trach and a vent. And so we began by interviewing families from our 3 different states, so from Maryland, Mississippi, and Washington, and interviewed an equal number of families who had chosen for and families who had chosen against tracheostomy and home ventilation for their children, and asked them a lot of questions. We're so grateful at how much they gave of themselves to answer what were probably pretty hard questions to hear. And we, after gathering all of that information, worked very hard to condense it and synthesize it into what we felt were sort of key elements we were hearing from different families, and then translated those key elements into this website that we've created. And so we launched this in June of this year, and really are very welcoming of feedback from parents and advocates and clinicians and whoever goes to the website and looks at it and tries to use it. There's a survey embedded within the website to help garner feedback about how people are using it and what the strengths and weaknesses might be. And I think maybe as we talk through the next slide, Blythe, we can talk a little bit more about what the website is about. Maybe I'll start off by talking about just making sure we're all on the same page about the context of why families are even in a place to be facing decisions like this for their children. And the context can be pretty varied. So it might be that, you know, some people actually know from before the time, from the time that they're pregnant, that their child is going to be born with a condition that might ultimately result in the need for home ventilation. Some people deliver very premature babies and are in the NICU for 6 or 10 or 14 months and then face this decision. Some people have children with progressive conditions over time, and as we've heard, might face this decision when their child is 4 or 6 or 8. Some families have a child who might be in an accident and face a very sudden decision about this. So I think the contexts are very different. Why these decisions are often shared with families. So instead of just the physician saying, oh, your child needs this and moving forward, like they might say, oh, your child needs an antibiotic and moving forward, is that it's obviously a really big deal. And a big deal for the kid, a big deal for the family. And so and not always 100% clear about what the right thing is to do. Reasonable people might disagree, in fact, about the right thing to do for a given child. And so when we're in that sort of situation, then it is typically medical practice to share this decision with families, to sit down and talk through what does feel right. What does feel best for your child, given who you are, given who your child is, given what's important to you. Maybe Carrie, I'll ask if you want to talk a bit about what the typical process is of making a decision.
From what our research is, or just in my experience, I guess I can
Sure.
speak to both. Well, I think we came at this project with our own ideas of what the typical process looked like between the three of us at 3 different institutions. It felt very ad hoc or kind of variable and scattered. Some places might have teams that can consult and participate. In some places, it's a little more slim, where it might just be an ICU provider of the week or of the day, kind of directing that or pushing something or initiating that conversation. So we felt like the variability of who's kind of guiding this process and the intensity and the thoroughness of the process was not always the same. And so there were definitely parents who weren't getting maybe as much education or background information or even ability to participate in the decision at some places versus others. And so we talked about that a lot. And I think we're still talking about that, because I think now as we've made this tool, one of the things we'd like to do is to try to use this tool and the question prompt list that's associated with it, as well as a few other more programmed aspects or prescribed aspects, to try to make the process more thorough and a little bit more uniform, and to at least provide like a roadmap for other places to be able to say, this is kind of a good way to go about this. These are the different people we should be involving. These are some of the things we should be doing and working with, and not necessarily rushing or driving the decision. So I think that's what I have to say about that. And we do have some evidence that the process isn't uniform. I think there's a little bit of data about that, both from the home vent director's side of it, but as well as what our parents told us that we interviewed for this, especially. It was really variable what a lot of them were hearing and experiencing when they made their decision, at least in retrospect. So.
Ben, do you want to add?
No, I think Carrie did a really good job of saying that. Nothing to say it right now.
I think that some of our concerns were We're obviously both at the individual parent level, worrying that individual parents weren't getting all the information they needed, weren't being given the space to talk about all the things that from their perspective were involved in this decision. Like we heard about the, but we live in this house and it's all mashed together and the dog, and maybe parents weren't given the space to talk about those things. Not everybody was getting a chance to talk to anyone from palliative care and somebody really comfortable with talking through what might it look like if we didn't go forward with this? What might it look like if your child's life was short? And so for sure we were wondering how we could improve things at the patient level. I think the three of us also talk a lot about justice and fairness and making sure that it's not just some kinds of families that have these sorts of discussions, either families who maybe are well off or go to a hospital with tons of resources. And so all of these things are integrated in their care, or alternatively, families without a lot of resources who maybe trigger different kinds of conversations with clinicians and more worry about the the day-to-day stuff or the transportation or the housing. But what we were really interested in, are really interested in, is creating a uniform, not a prescriptive, but sort of a consistent process that is used no matter who a family is, so that every family gets a chance to talk about these things, to talk about their family life at home, to talk about their other children, to talk about their own emotions about this, what it feels like to be making this decision, and making sure that those resources were available to everyone. So, once we'd interviewed families from across the country and really tried to distill it down, we spent the better part of a year creating the Family Reflections website. And we had a few guiding principles as we created this website. So one was that we were, maybe the top of the list was that we were most committed to making sure that it had a balanced telling of both families who chose for and families who chose against. If you are interested in this topic, maybe you've shopped around the websites that are out there and know that aside from Courageous Parents Network, I think that many of the other sites, not that there's many, the few other sites that are out there that have parent stories tend to be stories of families who chose for this. And that's fantastic. We need to hear that. We need to hear what life is like once you've chosen it, and what is it like to go home and have this, but it leaves out the chance to tell the story of the families who chose against. And what happened then? Did their child remain on BiPAP for 3 years and then eventually they faced the trach decision again? Did their child get better and it turned out they didn't need this? Did their child stay in the hospital for 6 months and end up dying there? Did they go home with hospice? What were those stories? So we worked really hard to create a website that would be able to portray those stories. And we tried our best to honor the diversity in the families as well, whether they were single parents, whether they were parents in a rural area, parents with lots of education, parents who had multiple other children. We tried to honor the realities that go along with making these decisions when you have different kinds of families and you're different kinds of people. So, the website really highlights the common principles that we heard among families, no matter who they were. So we heard from families, obviously, that when they were facing this decision for their child, they thought a lot about the medical piece. Was this going to make their child better? Was this going to be a really complicated thing because of their child's other conditions? What other options were there? Did they have the option of BiPAP at home? Did they not have the option of BiPAP at home? We heard a lot from families about their communication with clinicians and how the conversations that they had in the hospital, maybe with their pulmonologist as an outpatient, maybe with other families via Facebook or other people that they knew in their family, how those conversations really shaped what they thought. And if the conversations didn't go well, that was super stressful and made the decision so much harder. We heard a lot about family considerations about their life at home. So really thinking a lot about what would it mean to live at home with home ventilation? What would it mean for their jobs? What would it mean for where the child lived in the house? What would it mean for their other children getting back and forth to the things they needed to get to? What would it mean for the child? Would they be able to talk? Would they be able to be with the family when they went on vacation? Would they be able to go on vacation? All of these things that I think families, when we asked them how much of that stuff they'd gotten to talk about with clinicians, by and large, families told us not enough, that they really hadn't been able to talk about that stuff with clinicians. And something important that they told us that they hadn't gotten to do, that is blithe, something for us all to work on, is that families really would have appreciated a one-on-one conversation with other families. I think one family is hard, right? Because you talk to one family and that's just one view, but some ability to talk to multiple families and ask the hard questions. Because, Ben and Carrie and I, we work with these patients in a medical setting. We don't live at home. We don't understand. We don't know how you go to Target or how you get a babysitter or how you navigate stairs. This really is other families that people need to talk to. So we really need to do a better job of that. Ben, do you want to talk about what it is that we feel like we're still trying to learn around the whole process and with the website?
Yeah, thank you. So, I think that actually, I'm going to begin by actually making one more reflection on something you just said a moment ago, Renee, which I think to me is really critical in the website itself, which is that notion that if we talk to one or two parents, it's just one or two parents. And so a real part of the website for us was trying to create multiple stories, multiple different perspectives, regardless of the decision. So when a parent could look at this, they could figure out which story resonated with them, which way of thinking resonated with them, and really have a chance to sort of reflect and process that themselves as it means to them. And so our hope is that actually the website itself is a way of giving parents something even above and beyond what they ever could get from talking to a particular parent, not to replace a particular parent, but just to supplement that. What we're still trying to learn is how a website like this could be used by families and by clinicians to help, as Renee said, have a more consistent way that parents are making decisions, how they're being engaged, to slow the process down, to sort of see the options in a balanced way. And so what we're currently doing right now is we are trying to test out one approach to this, which would involve having parents not only look at the website, but then have a subsequent conversation really grounded on the principles of palliative care, where we try to learn about a family, learn about their values, explore with them what this would mean for them at home, and try to take this information in and then summarize this back for the family in a written form, but also share that information with the clinical team. And then the idea would be to have a way of having a conversation with the clinical team about both what we've learned from the family, but also how the team thinks about this. So what we're trying to learn is whether these ideas, this structured conversation with the family, this structured conversation with the provide the clinical team will actually allow the parents and the team to, on their own, have a better discussion than they would have had otherwise. So we're actually in the process now of doing some pilot work at our 3 institutions with about 10 families to see how this works. And then our hope is, based upon the experience we have, we will then hopefully be able to do a much larger project trying to test out this approach.
If you can go back 1 second slide. Yeah, so, you know, as Ben mentioned, I think that our hope is that families and clinicians will find a way to use this tool that really enhances their decision-making process. And if we had to summarize what kind of the big picture is, that the main elements is that there are options. So we want every family to know that there are options, that it's not just a slam dunk, this is what you have to do one way or the other. Blythe, can you go to the next slide? We floated back to the prior. There we are. Middle slide. There we are. That there are a range of people that families can talk to about the different options, whether that be palliative care, whether that be other families, and that really we all firmly believe that the decision should consider how the different options might impact the child as well as the whole family.
Mm-hmm.
Carrie, anything you want to add to anything that we've been saying?
I don't think so. We can keep moving and see if I want to pitch in anymore.
Okay. So I know we're getting closer to the time of the Q&A. We proposed these questions, things that we heard, and I'll just name them, and then we can open it up and see if people want to ask. So I think that a lot of families facing these decisions wonder, how have families managed to integrate this, to integrate home ventilation into their life and into their home, and what things have made that easier and what's made it harder. Lots of questions about home nursing, and very important questions about home nursing. Is it okay to factor in how this might affect our jobs or our home or our other kids? How do we know what to ask? This is a super complicated thing. How do we even know what to ask? And as Carrie mentioned, embedded in the website is a list of questions that we pulled from what the families told us they asked or wanted to ask. And that list of questions can be downloaded from the website that hopefully families can sort of bring with them and ask different providers. How do we get pediatric palliative care involved, and what are they anyway? What will they do? How could they help this situation? What will happen if we decide not to go forward with a trach or home vent for a child? And some families have asked, what if we do go forward, but turns out we're not able to care for our child at home? What happens then? So I'll pause there and Blythe, hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Carrie and Ben and Renee. As I said, we were going to send a follow-up email to everyone with links to resources, including the Family Reflections site that this team has produced, which is incredible. We've looked at it really carefully and learned a lot, and cannot speak highly enough about it. And Courageous Parents Network also has a lot of resources that complement this. So it's sort of they're complementary, including voices. We have over 30 videos of parents and providers talking about the decision, parents who've elected yes, parents who have elected no, parents who elected no and their child is still on BiPAP, a pulmonologist, a surgeon, a palliative care doctor. So a lot of different voices to inform the decision. We also have a guided pathway, which includes sort of the steps to consider with complementary videos, and then just a guide. And I think these two resources together, the Family Reflections and CPN's resources on tracheostomy together would provide a really, a very, very good start, and more, even better. Like, I think taken in their entirety would get families all the information they need for what is ultimately a very emotional, personal decision. So I will now, we can open it up to questions, questions for Renee and Carrie and Ben, or questions of parents, other parents who might be on the phone. If there are, I will say, if there are parents who are participating, we don't know who you are. We don't know if you're a parent or a provider. We encourage parents to speak up first because we really, this is first and foremost for parents. So please unmute yourself. You can raise your hand, or you can just start going and we'll hear. Don't be shy. No, is there anything in the chat that we should look at? Oops. As you can see, I'm getting.
No, there's nothing right now in the chat.
Okay.
Question wise.
So,
go ahead.
Well, one of the things that I'll just jump in with this is, and we were talking a little bit before we started, is one of the first of all, the fact that your goals, Renee, Carrie, and Ben, is to sort of standardize the process and empower parents with the list of questions to ask, and standardize it for providers who I know want to support families well but don't know how to do that. That is so important, so that there isn't this discrepancy, and so that parents aren't blindsided and don't suddenly feel either ill-equipped or guilty or whatever it is, all the things, all the ways that it can get complicated. I heard earlier this week, talking to a provider at a major children's hospital, that some families she works with who happen to be Spanish speaking have been, number one, left with not enough home care nursing, with home care nurses who know how to take care of children with a trach, and that doesn't have anything to do with Spanish. That just has to do with the availability of home care nurses. And then how, if you layer onto that some of the language barriers, that it just gets really complicated. And one of the things I really wonder about is how it's one thing for a parent to ask you as a doctor or a nurse or a social worker helping them make a decision about the availability, but do you proactively say, I just want to flag that there may not be available nurses in your community. This is something that you should look into first. Because it's sort of a upsetting, distressing thing to have to say or hear, but it's so important.
Yeah, I don't claim to believe that it's said consistently everywhere. In fact, I know that it's not, because we, in our interviews of families for this study and other studies, talked to families who told us that they didn't realize until right before they were going home that home nursing wouldn't be available as much as they had thought. And I think that the home nursing story is its own complex story about insurance and the number of trained pediatric providers, home nursing providers versus adult home nursing providers, and the reimbursement by state of home nurses. You know, in some states, home nurses are reimbursed the same amount, kind of regardless of what they're being asked to do in the home. And so anyway, a whole nother story. Do we universally tell families that, and do we do that early enough that they can really integrate that information into their decision? I'm pretty sure the answer is probably not. You know, we talk to families in 3 states, so we know what's happening in 3 states. But my guess is those 3 states are not unique, and that it is not consistently happening.
I was struck in your video, Blythe, that first mom, I think the part I remember the most was when she was talking about being in her son's room and she said, I'm the nurse today. Because I'm currently trying to write the story of the expectations and the reality of home health that we learned from talking to our parents. And it's been super eye-opening. So not only the availability and the language barrier piece of it, but the step off and what your home nurses can do. You know, these parents are usually being discharged from a major children's hospital, if not from an intensive care unit, directly home. And the nurses that come to their house are not always the same as what they're used to seeing and dealing with when they're in the hospital. And that becomes, I think that was super stressful for a lot of those parents too. So it's a really, really big deal is actually what we've heard. And I've much like I think Renee said earlier too, like I've never had to have home health in my house. And so I don't know what that's like. And so it's hard for you to counsel families when you don't know that experience. So that's where it's really important where some of these other parents are able to speak up and relay what that's like.
Because I bet one of the things that you also heard, I suspect, was that from the parents whose children do have trach, the sense of ultimately the mastery that they have around caring for their child, and perhaps the pride they have in the care that they have figured out how to do, and then having to train others in that. So I mean,
we absolutely heard that. I mean, super spoiler alert, but like every parent, the parents were all really, really worried about how am I going to do, like, this is what doctors do. I don't know what PEEP is and how am I going to suction? And I'm not a respiratory therapist. And once they got home, those things were they mastered them very quickly and easily. Mm-hmm. But then all this other stuff that they didn't anticipate kind of became more difficult to navigate. I mean, it's in a very broad stroke, that's a lot of what we've learned from the parents that we've talked to so far.
And one thing, I just want to add one thing or elaborate on one of the comments that actually Renee had mentioned, the effect of this varies from state to state. So I want to just tell a very brief anecdote. When I did my pulmonary training in Wisconsin, you know, we had this is back in the 1980s, but we had a very focused program on the transitions to home with mechanical ventilation, making sure that not only the parents were trained, but in terms of the nursing and making sure he was trained, making sure there's a fairly extensive backup system, you know, for everybody. And it often take 2 to 4 months. And we would typically, our goal long-term was to have 16 hours a day of home nursing. So initially 24 hours, but it was 16 hours a day was the standard. So I spent 4 years learning how to do this. And when I moved to Tucson, and the first time I was trying to discharge somebody home, and I was trying to arrange for home nursing, and I remember talking with somebody, I forget who this person was, but it was somebody from some state health agency, and I was trying to arrange for the hours, and I said, well, you know, like, you know, 24 and then 16 hours. And they go, we don't provide 16 hours a day. We only provide 8 hours a day. And I says, well, look, the parents have to sleep, they have to work. And this person goes, well, it's not our responsibility if the parents choose to work. And it was just one of these mind-blowing like conversations where I felt like between the Arizona and Wisconsin, 2 different worlds. And that was, again, this was now back in the 90s. I'm no longer as directly involved anymore with home mechanical ventilation, so I really don't know where things stand. But this whole notion that Renee was getting to, that both from a finance perspective as well as from the availability of nurses, can be incredibly variable from wherever you happen to live. And I think it's one of the huge inequities that we have that families have to face. Yep. And it's not ideal.
Yep.
So I have I have a question. My name's Robin Kingston. I'm a nurse practitioner and I coordinate our pediatric home ventilator program at the Hershey Medical Center, Penn State Children's Hospital. So you said you were piloting this in your 3 institutions. So I was just curious as to, I don't know how far you are in the pilot, but how you feel the consistency of the conversations are going and how the parents are reacting to it.
Renee, you're on mute.
Sorry. We've literally just started, Robin. So we don't know, but ask us again in 6 months. Hopefully we'll have some information. So at this point, we're just getting it off the ground across the 3 centers. And I would say the one thing that I feel like I've learned so far trying to put it in place is that the whole thing is even more complex than we could imagine. So I don't know is the honest answer. I don't know how it'll go, but we should know more in 6 or so months.
This is Hemant Savnani. I'm one of the pediatric pulmonologists here at Cincinnati. And we have a fairly large home vent as well as a chronic population that's progressing, a neuromuscular patient population. And, you know, we struggle with the way the message is delivered. A long time ago, I would say about 8 years ago, we struggled with the delivery of messages from various ICU teams about the need for invasive ventilation in these children. And I have personally been at the bedside where we are expected to have a care conference with the family, and before she leaves, the intensivist actually just candidly tells the family, if you don't place a trach, your child will die. And I think the terminology and the phrasing does not allow a family then to make an objective decision when you've already instilled a sense of guilt in the family with such words. And so I think this is a really, really nice and important effort. And I'm so glad that you have brought this out to this level. We have, since that time, developed a team in our institute that comprises pulmonary ICU docs, neonatal representation, some nurse practitioners, palliative ethics people. We have some involvement intermittently from the cardiac ICU, but we always sought to get one ICU doc on that team so that whenever these situations arose anywhere through the hospital, there was a team that could deliver unbiased messaging informatively with a handout to families to make these decisions. Renee, just like you, I can't say that everything always goes the way we would like it to go, but there are certainly steps better than they used to be. I think there's, on the greater scheme of things, I am a little better pleased now than I was then.
That's great. That's great to hear.
But we are at an age where we have medical technologies that are making these children live longer, effectively. And we also don't have communities ready to receive these children.
Yeah.
And at some point, I think the efforts to harmonize the nature and content of these conversations with families should also include educational tools to medical students and residents. I find it hard to rely on the content of conversations of residents with families in these matters. Even some of our senior residents seem very tepid about having hard conversations, understandably so. But this needs to be a part of our curriculum and how we train our fellows. And lastly, we are going to have to get together nationally. This is not one person's problem, it's all of our problem, about challenging states to begin to support a track for home nursing education so we can actually get home nurses to be available to take these children home. Our problem has been what is probably not different from what you've seen or observed, is the lengthy stays in the hospital because of difficulty of getting home nursing. And it makes it really hard for the families to begin to see value in their decision when their goal has always been to take the child home, but we're stuck because you can't get 7 nights of nursing, which is a minimal requirement for us to assure that the family at least gets some rest. So there are many layers to this, but I think, you know, each one of us is making an effort to get a piece of sanity to some of this, but I think the problems really are multiple, and we could really get something going nationally with a network of folks involved and a good effort and good conversation. I applaud this. This is wonderful, and I'm so glad for your website. I truly hope there's a Spanish component to this, because we've had the same discussion that the videos that we need to encompass the pros and the cons. I mean, the doers for and against tracheostomies need to be balanced between race, ethnicity, and values, you know, in order to become somewhat more unbiased. But thank you for doing this.
Thank you. There's a lot of layers to that. I'll just call out one of them, which is the communication piece, because I see there's another comment in the chat about communication and helping families to hear the information. And I agree with you. It's not just about the information, right? It's how the information is presented. And I think for us, one of the benefits of adding palliative care expertise into the mix is that those are people who do have the extra training and focus in communication, and so I think that can be helpful. But it doesn't do away with the question about making sure that communication skills are held by people more broadly on the team, because of course in the way that hospitals work, not the same person is there all of the time. So I do think that it's not just about the information that's relayed, it is about how the information is relayed.
Yeah. I will say we're happy to stay on for a few more minutes for anybody who wants to and can be part of the conversation. I don't know, Carrie, Ben, or Renee, what your availability is to linger for maybe 5 more minutes. If I encourage others, if they still have a question, to ask while we have our guests with us, or observation. If no one's going to say, I have a provocative question, which I get to ask because I'm a parent. In the people that you interviewed, did any of the parents express regret for their decision?
Yes. It is very hard for parents to name regret. And in fact, we asked a very specific question, do you regret anything? And by and large, the answer was no. But in other parts of the conversation, parents were able to speak up and name their regret on their own terms. And we did have a couple of families that talked very articulately about feeling like they'd made the wrong choice and wishing they'd known more, that if they had known more about what it might be like, they would have made different decisions. So yes, I think there are people out there who regret their decisions. I will say that the vast majority of people that we interviewed at least told us they felt at peace with their decision. And that was equal among the families who chose against and the families that chose for home ventilation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to add something, take this from a slightly different perspective, or not different perspective, but different aspect of what we learned from the interviews. I mean, what we learned from the interviews was whether they described regret or not, this is really difficult in multiple ways. And I currently, as a pulmonologist, no longer take care of kids on home mechanical ventilation, and my practice is limited to kids with chronic lung disease or prematurity. who are going to go home on oxygen, maybe a feeding tube, which compared to this is way less complex. However, the experience of us doing our project over the last several years and learning about these families and what they face with these complex decisions, I've been able to translate and be able to do a better job, I think, at least trying to realize that my families who have much less stuff are having equally as hard a time. And I think the big issue that as clinicians we have to do is to figure out how to support families, because nothing is ever easy. And it's always hard.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Life, can you hear me?
Yes.
It's Janet. Okay, just another observation that I think brings up the value both for families as well as for, as we were talking about, perhaps more, junior, whether it's the residents or people early on in their career, the value of a Courageous Parents Network, the videos and or the guide, just like with Family Reflections, is that families and or providers can look at these tools ahead of time, can learn from the tools. So not only do we want to promote them learning those verbal skills, but they can look at videos, they can read the information provided, and also be educated in that way to provide families with this and help families access it as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Janet. Anybody else? I do want to, Renee and Carrie and Ben, there's a question about how long you are going to follow families, and whether this notion of decisional regret, including for families whose children die and into bereavement.
Yeah, great question. So for the pilot we're doing right now, we're only following very short term, but that's because we're just trying to get at the kinks and how it all works so that we can then launch the larger study. But we're all aware of some existing data to show that regret changes over time. So whether you're 1 month away from the decision or 1 year away from the decision, your answers might be different. And that it really be important that we follow at each step, so that we not just capture the 1 year and we not just capture the 1 month. So it's a great question. We will definitely be following longitudinally. How far out, I can't predict right at this moment, but I think even a year at this point is further out than the current data have looked at. So at least to a year. I just want to thank again Blythe and CPN for inviting us. And I feel really honored that so many people are here and were interested in this. And if you have other questions or remain interested in this, we love collaborating with people from all over the country. We collaborate with families, we collaborate with clinicians. So we would welcome anyone who wanted to reach out to us at any point and offer us suggestions or offer to collaborate or ideas, whatever it is. We welcome the contact.
So Renee, should I include your email, your
Sure.
3 emails in the follow-up that I send to people? So if they want to be in touch with you,
Absolutely.
I have your permission.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time or more of that. And thank you for all of the people who chose to spend this hour with us. This is really, this sums up everything that we care about. I will send a follow-up email to everyone who registered with all the information so you won't have missed anything, and you can watch it and share it with other members of your team who weren't able to join it, or a parenting partner if you're in the middle of trying to think about this. And I do want to also put a plug in. Our next live in the Zoom room is on November 18th, and it's on the topic of what does a good day look like? So, because good days can, little things, big things. We think it's a hopeful, happy, multi-dimensional topic to explore. So please go onto the CPN website. I'll include a link to register for that also. And last but not least, please stay well and safe. Don't get COVID. And just be well in all the ways that matter to you. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.